Colony. This is mainly a dice game. It is set in a post-apocalyptic environment as players are trying to reconstruct society, or in any case to create engines of resources and to gain power for themselves. It's a 2 to 4 player game mainly. It also has a solitaire option, which I haven't tried, but if you want it, it's there. It's a game that has similarities with several games that you may have seen or tried in the last couple of years. Machi Koro comes to mind, but with a different theme. Deck building games in general, but with the idea here that you will acquire cards indeed, but they do not go in a deck that then you shuffle and then they come out randomly like in deck building games. More like in a tableau type of game. You will roll dice to collect resources, use them to buy cards, and then those cards will give you abilities that you trigger by tapping the cards each turn. That's the general idea. Let me show you more in detail how Colony works. Each game there will be 13 types of cards for the players to acquire. They're placed in stacks. When you acquire one, you simply take the one on top of the stack and put it in your play area, and you will be able to use it every round. So each round simply you will you will roll dice, you will try to acquire a card, and then you will use the cards that you have. You tap them in your play area to indicate that you use them, and then you do what the card allows you to do. Those cards have printed on top the cost to acquire that card. For example, to acquire the pawn shop, I need to spend a 5 and 2 force. And at the bottom, you have what the card lets you do. For example, I can exchange any die for a 5 or a 5 for any die. A white 5, actually. White dice represent stable resources which you can collect and save from turn to turn, as opposed to gray dice represent unstable resources. You have to discard them at the end of the turn if you haven't used them. And so, following the same idea, if I purchase a fabric replicator by spending 3 5s and a 2, it goes in my area. And each turn I can tap it to take an unstable 4 and put it in my play area and use it. Here I have an unstable 5, unstable 6, and so on and so forth. Other cards will allow me to do different things. For example, the Swindler, I can exchange an opponent's dice of any value with another one that I have of any value. The Pirate lets you attack the opponent. You roll a die and see what happens. You can pause the video and read the card if you want to have more information. Cards, you have defensive cards such as the Force Shield. You roll a die to see how many charges the Force Shield has, and each time you use it to protect yourself, it consumes a charge. And so you can see different things do different things for you. A very important card among the ones that are permanent is the Fallout Shelter. The Fallout Shelter gives you points based on the number of Fallout Shelters that you have. If, for example, you have 4 Fallout Shelters, you score 9 points. Now each card can be upgraded to the better side, which is printed on the back. There's an action that you can perform to upgrade cards, and that also includes Fallout Shelters. They give you more points, and pretty much getting a ton of Fallout Shelters and upgrading them is the way to go to win the game. You can also collect victory points from other sources, but that definitely is the main source. So each game you will have 13 types of cards in 13 stacks. 6 are standard, they will always be there in every game. The other 7 are variable, so you will select them randomly or in agreement with your friends. And as you can see, the set really has a ton of cards, a lot of different cards that you will use in different combinations, so you will not use every card every turn. No 2 games will ever be the same, as the motto usually goes. So you will acquire cards during the game, but you also start with some cards. In fact, you start with these 4 cards here. One is your warehouse, which you use to store your dice from turn to turn. It can be upgraded, so you can store more dice, 9 instead of 6. The supply exchange, when you use it, again, when you use a card, you tap it, and this one I can exchange 2 dice with the same result for any other die, which is for any other white die. So for example, I could exchange these two for, I don't know, this one for example, and use it right away, or put it in my play area, in my warehouse, if I don't use it this turn. The upgrade is the action that lets me upgrade cards, that is, flips them to their better side. For example, so if to upgrade, to use the upgrade action, again I tap it to indicate I use the card. You can only use each card once per turn. I spend a 1, 2, 3, and a 4, and I can upgrade another card. Now, for example, the supply exchange lets me exchange any 2 dice. Any 2 dice, no matter what they show, which kind of die they are, for any die that I want. Sweet. You can also upgrade the upgrade. That's so meta. And in this case, you only need a 2, a 3, and a 4 to upgrade a card. The construction card is a card that lets you buy cards. So that's, and again, you tap it as a reminder that you used it, because you can only buy 1 card per turn unless there is an action that lets you do something different. If you don't buy that, if you don't use the card to buy a card, you can use a construction site to collect a token, which will give you, which you can later exchange for an unstable die. So these are pretty much the things that you have to do stuff. Again, the general idea is that you will use dice to acquire cards that will let your car acquire more cards. Ultimately, you're building this engine to be able to acquire a lot of victory point cards and reach a certain number of points before the opponents do. The number of victory points required to win depends on the number of players. At the beginning of your turn, you will have some dice there, either because you store them from previous turns and or because the other players gave you some. I'll show you what that means. At the beginning of your turn, you take the dice that will be there in your warehouse, you make them available. Then you take 3 dice from the general supply. You take 3 dice, 3 white dice, and you roll them. Oh, that's interesting. Look at that. We rolled a 6, a 4, and a 1. That is exactly what happened. You saw it. No weird stuff going on. So you roll those 3 dice, and then you choose 1 for yourself, and you pass the other 2 to the next player, who chooses 1, places it in their warehouse if they have room. If their warehouse is already full, they need to choose which one would be discarded, maybe the one you gave them, maybe another one that was already there. So the second player, the player next to you, gets to choose 1 of these 2 dice, and then the remaining dice pass to the next player, who also adds it to their warehouse or chooses to discard it. So that's why when your turn starts, you will have some dice that the players will have given to you. As a second player, you even get a little bit of a choice out of your turn to decide which one you want to save. As the player after that, you just get a die. You don't get to choose, but you're already thinking, what can I do? And maybe if your warehouse is full already, you are making a decision there. Which one do I save and which one do I discard? But back to you. You are the active player. Now you have pretty much the dice that you have in your warehouse plus 1. Maybe you have some of these tokens and you decide to spend them to also roll unstable resources. Then you have your dice and you pretty much start using your actions here, the ones that you have at the beginning, but then remember also the actions that you may have acquired. For example, look at this. I had, and you saw that was it. I have 3 5s, and a 2. 3 5s and a 2. With that set, I could buy a fabric replicator, and so I decide to use my construction site, tap it to indicate I used it. I spend those dice, return them to the supply, and get the fabric replicator. Hooray! And I add it to my play area. So as turns go by, turn after turn, I will start having more cards, maybe after a couple of turns. These are the cards that I have. And that means that during my turn, again, I can simply use any and all of my cards. So for a couple of turns, this is the situation. These are the dice that I have. I make them available. Roll 3 dice, pass 2 around, la 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 la. And then I have these other cards here, and I start using my cards. Okay, I want to use the supply exchange to trade these 2 and make them into a 6, for example. I'm gonna use the Swindler to give you this one, and I get that one that you really want to keep, but you're not, because I had the Swindler. Oh, let me get also a 4 unstable from the Fabric Replicator, just because I also have a 5 and a 2 unstable that I get there, and then I do stuff with them, and so on and so forth. So your cards will produce dice. Other effects will let you do stuff with them. Oh, I even have a 3. That's amazing. And maybe I have another game effects that lets me turn this one into a 1. So now I have a 1, a 3, and a 4, so I can use the upgrade action that I use on the Fabric Replicator, which now each turn will give me a stable 4, and so on and so forth. And at the end of the turn, these are the dice that I still have. Then I discard the unstable resources and save the other ones. So this is the general idea. Collect dice, roll dice to buy cards, use dice to get more cards and more dice, and to upgrade cards. Buy a lot of Fallout Shelters, buy other cards that may give you victory points. The first player to get the target amount of victory points is the winner of the game. I like this game quite a bit. I would say it surprised me. I was pleasantly surprised by it. After playing it, I expected a Machikoro type of experience, something like, I've seen it before. And I also expected something very luck-based and very light, very straightforward, sort of like autopilot. Well, each turn I will have just a thing or two to do. These are the dice that I have, so I'll just do whatever makes sense. The game turned out to have more levels of decision and more strategy than I expected, and that's what I liked. The game felt light overall in terms of complexity of the rules, so it was easy to teach even to players that are not habitual players. It felt very clean, very terse, very neat, geometrical almost in its linearity, and yet around this very simple, very economic core of rules there were, yes, interesting and non-obvious decisions to make. Some decisions may seem obvious. Well, I'm gonna roll some dice, I'm gonna try to get a lot of 6s, because 6s are usually better than other results. And so, if you're rolling the dice during your turn, those 3 dice, I roll a 6, a 1, and a 2, I'm most likely keeping the 6 and giving you the other dice. That is something that may give you the sense, see, that is not an interesting decision. Why would you ever give other dice to other people? Because maybe they need precisely a 1 or a 2, which sure, usually are not particularly good, but in certain combination, maybe just what the next player needs to complete a set. That will be painful for me if that player gets it. Precisely because people may dump the 1s and the 2s easily, now all of a sudden I see that the next player has a set of 3 1s, and 4 of a kind is what you need to take a Fallout Shelter, which is what gives you points. So that die that per se would not be particularly important, and people tend in fact to dump on the next player, now if I give it to you, may give you a Fallout Shelter, which may just be something that is always good for you. Maybe it's the one Fallout Shelter that will give you victory. So there is that element of taking into account what other players need, which makes, I wouldn't say all numbers equally valuable, because there's still some numbers that objectively will allow you to get better cards, but it definitely restricts the range between the most valuable and the quote-unquote least valuable. It gives a situational element that gives you reasons to think about what the heck you're doing and what the dice mean, not just in general, but in that specific circumstance that you're analyzing. The same when somebody is handing you the 2 dice and you choose which one is good for you, and then it's interesting and really fun to create different combos. Again, for a dice game, I found the luck had a surprisingly small role. Yes, there is luck, heck, it's dice. But after a couple of rounds, after you have acquired a couple of cards, I get the sense that you're able to mitigate luck in a lot of different ways. You have, for example, decided to upgrade the card that lets you turn a pair into another result, you upgraded it into any 2 dice into another result. And then you get other effects that give you those not particularly valuable, unstable dice, which are not particularly valuable per se, but could be interesting if you trade them as resources to do other game effects. After a couple of rounds, I found that in most cases I was able to do what I was aiming to do, what I had in mind to do. And then also the different strategies that will expose you to more or less luck. If you use the pirate is pretty unpredictable. Other game effects are unpredictable. You roll a die to determine how many points a certain card will give you. The Fallout Shelter is the most reliable source of victory points, and definitely the main one. But sometimes you maybe cut a corner and you get lucky by using another card that has a certain luck element and gives you a lot of points. So you can actually decide when you're selecting cards that are available for purchase how much luck you want to take. You want to take, you want your strategy to revolve around a really tight, optimized algorithm. You can do that. You want to be aggressive. You want to have the kind of interaction with other players. You want to expose yourself to a little bit of extra luck. With the possibility of a bigger payoff, you can do that. So I really was pleasantly surprised by the fact that there was more strategy than I expected. I expected roll the dice, see what you can do, buy the one card that it makes sense, and done. And actually, I was pleasantly surprised that there was more, definitely more to it. I also like the fact that the game can be played in different styles depending on the combination of cards that are available, similarly to many deck building games and similar to games out there, say also like Machikoro, for example, in which it can be more confrontational, less confrontational, it can be multiplayer solo, it can be really interactive. There always is the element of indirect interaction of like, what do I take, and by definition, what I leave to the next player. But on top of that, there may be other game effects that may or may not be there. It's up to the players to decide the kind of style that suits to them. So I definitely also like the flexibility that there is there. For a simple, very light game that is, in terms of complexity, is not harder to learn than a filler, but it definitely takes longer to play, and it is much more rewarding. For a game that is as easy as a filler to learn, it is a game that has some very interesting wrinkles when it comes to the strategy. I like the art, I like the components in general, I like the flexibility of the system with all of the different ways in which you can customize each game by using different types of cards. So in general, impressed. I was pretty impressed by Colony. I find it to be a really solid game. The depth may not be apparent at first. It may feel like it's only random based, but give it a try and maybe then give it a second try and maybe a third one yet. If at the point, if the game still, doesn't resonate with you, and that's possible too, that happens. Not every game is for everybody. But I think that this is a game that has more than meets the eye. Definitely, it is a game that I enjoy playing and that I will play again in the future.